O tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So I'd like to welcome everyone this evening. And uh, so one of the things um, about the Buddha was, he had this real skill in teaching. He had this real skill in making his teachings really accessible to people. He was really able to uh, teach different people where they were at and teach them in different ways. So you can sometimes even see he's taught slightly different for different people. And it's really nice at the beginning of the suttas, the text, the teachings of the Buddha. A lot of times it starts off with, explaining, the situation. When the Buddha went and taught these people at this place and taught in such and such a way. And you can see kind of these examples of where the Buddha really kind of personalized these teachings for these different groups of people. So, for example, at the beginning of his teaching, the beginning of the Buddha Sasana, he went and taught these fire worshippers, the three Kassapa brothers, and all of their students, their disciples. And so, because they were fire worshippers, he brought a lot of the similes of fire, and he brought a lot of that imagery into it because it was something they could connect to, something they were already into, and so something which would be easy for them to understand. Or in other suttas, he'll do stuff like practice of the Brahmins at the time was worshiping the six directions. So he took that and he changed it and he flipped it around and turned it into a Dhamma teaching. And so and so there's this, great ability for him to teach certain people in certain situations. And one of the ways the Buddha did this was through the use of a lot of similes, a lot of comparisons to different things in the world, different situations, different animals, all kinds of things. And you could see even to this day that a lot of the really great teachers really use a lot of this real vibrant imagery and simile, just so we can connect to the teachings a little more. They don't make it too just straight technical. They want us to be able to connect to it and understand it. So in the one of the suttas, just a very short sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha brings up this simile of mice. So he said, he said there's these four types of mice in the world. He said there's the type of mouse um, that digs a hole, makes a hole, but doesn't live in it. And then he said there's another type of mouse that doesn't make a hole, but goes and lives in a hole. So I guess finds one or uses someone else's, but doesn't dig it himself. And then there's the mouse which neither digs a hole nor lives in a hole. And the fourth one, he said, there's the type of mouse that both digs a hole and lives in the hole. And he said, there are also people can be categorized into four types of people, corresponding to this. So so the first one he said, there's the kind of person which is like a mouse who digs a hole but doesn't live in it. And so he said, this is someone who learns the Dhamma, and in the way it's translated, they say masters the Dhamma. And then he goes on to explain all the different things, the discourses, the question and answers, the short teachings, the stories. So he's talking very much in this part when he's talking about Dhamma here. He's very much talking about like the discourses. We'd say like the Tipitaka. So someone who's really learned and memorized the text. But so that's the digging the hole. But they don't. but by being someone who digs a hole but doesn't live in it, is they've memorized all this Dhamma, all these texts, but they don't um, understand it for themselves. They've never realized it for themselves. And he said, they haven't realized this is the cause of suffering. This is suffering, sorry, this is the cause of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering. And this is the path leading to the cessation of suffering. So what he's saying is they've never actually realized the Four Noble Truths for themselves. They've never taken that knowledge that they've learned and put it into practice and really saw the fruit of that practice. And so, um, you know, it's not saying that that person's definitely the benefit of the holy life. The reason we practice is to put an end to all suffering. That's the ultimate goal. That's the whole reason for it. But, someone who, has learned the texts and stuff, learned all the Dhamma like that, it's not, they can still have benefit to other people, but but without having realized it for themselves, they won't have that benefit for themselves. So Lumpur Cha liked to tell the story from the suttas of Tuchopotila. So he was this monk in the time of the Buddha, and he was like this. He had memorized the teachings, but he had never realized them for himself. But he didn't just memorize them; he was really good at teaching, and he had all these students that he taught that themselves became enlightened because he was just so good at teaching them. And then at one point, it kind of hit him. It was like, oh wait, all my students are enlightened, but I'm not enlightened yet. So I need to start practicing. So, and it was hard for him to find a teacher because he was such a respected teacher himself that no one wanted to be his teacher. And you can see this in the modern time too. I have I had this friend, this monk, and this was about 10 years ago. And this was in central Thailand, and in that area, the local like administrative monasteries, they would once or twice a year they put on these meditation retreats, these teaching retreats for monks to teach them, how to meditate, and it would be set up as this like a retreat. But usually it was for like new monks who were more like city monks, study monks who hadn't really meditated, didn't know much about practice. But this monk I knew, he was really, really good practice. He had phenomenal meditation. He had lived for about 30 years with this really respected Kruba Ajahn at that point, knew his Dhamma, could really practice. But he was the one who was sent to go do this meditation retreat. And he said it was great, because the monastery we were living at was very hot, was quite austere. And he said the monastery they went to, it was the meditation hall had like nice soft carpet in it, and it had an air conditioning, and the monastery we were at was very hot, and he had no chores or anything. So he could just sit and meditate all day. And he'd just sit there for hours meditating. And it even got to the point where they were supposed to have daily interviews with the teacher. But the teacher there just saw this monk just sit for hours without moving, and he was like, "Yeah, you don't need to do interviews. You know what you're doing already. There's no need to do the interview." But this monk I was friends with was telling me that they had these different monks coming in and giving Dhamma talks to the group, and he said one of them gave this really great Dhamma talk about meditation and instructions on meditation. But he said the monk couldn't sit still. The whole time he was fidgeting and moving and changing posture. So he said he could tell that the monk didn't do a lot of meditation. Like he could tell his body didn't sit much. He wasn't calm, but he knew his stuff. And so, it was beneficial to the people, listening to it, but it wasn't really beneficial. Like he hadn't seen the fruit of why we practice, the results of the practice. And so the second type of mouse is one who doesn't make a hole or doesn't dig a hole themselves, but goes and lives in a hole. So this is someone who doesn't memorize the suttas, doesn't memorize the teachings, doesn't really master the texts, but they actually for themselves do practice and realize and understand, this is suffering. This is the cause of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering. This is the path leading to the cessation of suffering. So this is someone who they do the practice, but they don't really learn the text. And even nowadays, you sometimes get these different Krubajans, and they're like, um, never really studied much from the text. They had their teachers who taught them, and they were able to practice and become enlightened. So even when I lived with Lumpur Biek, At one time, he was giving a Dhamma talk, and he said, yeah, I haven't read many suttas. I've read a few, but not many. And for him, that was enough for him. But he, listened to the teachings of Luang Por Chah, of other Kruba Ajahns, and and he was just very naturally skilled at practice and meditation. So he had seen the results from that. And the third type of person comparing to a mouse is someone who neither digs a hole nor sleeps in a hole, goes and stays in a hole. So this is someone who they haven't learned any of the Dhamma, they haven't mastered the Dhamma, and they haven't realized the Dhamma for themselves. So this could be someone who maybe they've never encountered Dhamma before. They've never learned how to meditate. They've never encountered this, or it could even be someone who does know Dhamma, maybe is Buddhist, was maybe born Buddhist, um, but never actually tried to learn it. Maybe goes to the local monastery a couple times a year, does a ceremony, but never tried to really learn what the Buddha taught or practice and realize what the Buddha taught. And so they never got that benefit. Very similar to a mouse, it never built itself a home, never stays in a hole. So it doesn't have that protection of having a hole, having a den, having a nest, having a place to stay, or, having a refuge. And so this is the third type of a person. And the fourth type is compared to a mouse who both digs a hole and stays in a hole. So this is someone who really masters the Dhamma. They learn the text, they learn the suttas, and they actually really go out and practice it and realize it. And so someone like this, not only will that have a lot of benefit for themselves, it can have a lot of benefit for other people too, because they'll really have a lot of times they can have a lot of skill in teaching and passing on what they knew, interpreting the suttas, being able to explain this. So Lungta Mahabua, when he was this legendary forest monk in Thailand, and he was a disciple of Luang Por Mun, who was like the founder of the modern forest tradition in Thailand. But before he went to go and study and practice with Luang Por Mun, Lungta Mahabua had been a study monk. And that's the Maha in his name. That's not part of his actual name. That's a title. So in Thailand, there's these different levels of poly studies. There's 9 of them. And I think it's once you've passed the third level of poly studies, you get this title of Maha. And so it designates someone who's passed a certain level of studies. So he had done a lot of studying. And when he went to go stay with Luang Por Mun said, in the future, when you start teaching and everything, all that studying you did is going to be really beneficial. It's going to help you. But right now, you have to set it aside because it can get in the way. And this is something which can happen sometimes, if people overstudy or study too much, is when they go to practice, there can be a little too high expectations. Like, I expect it to be exactly like this and this and this, so I read it like this, and this is how I'm interpreting how it should be developing and advancing. And it doesn't always exactly the same. And so it's like when, the adjuns in Thailand, they always compare studying and practice to a map. So studying is like reading the map and learning the map. But practice is actually going out and going to that destination you've studied for. So you can see sometimes if you memorize a map too exact, you know, without any personal experience doing it, you might be like, well, on this map, there's a tree at this point, and I don't see that tree, so I must be in the wrong spot. But yeah, maybe that it wasn't exactly right, or maybe you already passed the tree and didn't realize it. But that's not saying studying isn't important. And it's one of these things that for all of us, there's going to be a different balance between how much study is necessary and how much study isn't necessary. And so this is something we have to, find for ourselves in our own practice. So some people, for their personality, they really do need to study more. They do need to learn more, or even just that studying, not just because maybe they have a lot of questions they need answering, or their mind just really likes getting into the real deep teachings, but sometimes the studying can really just help us keep our mind on track, keep us focused on the goal. So in Thailand right now, there's this monk named Ajahn Suchat, and he does a lot of teaching online in English because he speaks perfect English, and he was a disciple of Lungta Mahabua. And when he was practicing at Lungta Mahabua's monastery, this Lungta Mahabua's monastery was this super strict, like just go for enlightenment. He didn't want studying. This was a very, very strict practice monastery. But Lumpur Suchat had said that he would study the suttas for an hour a day when he was there. And it wasn't because he was studying to get any type of degree or anything like that, but he said that that studying helped him keep his mind on track. And that's an important thing for us when we're practicing to remember our goal, to keep our mind on track for the goal. But one of the things I really like about this sutta, the sutta on the mice, is that for the practice part of it, for the living in the whole, the Buddha really brings it back to the Four Noble Truths, you know, uh, dukkha, or we translate as suffering, isn't the best translation, but, it's what we usually translate it as, dukkha, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path leading to the end of suffering. And so I think sometimes, when we really start studying a lot, because there's so much in the suttas, in the Tipitaka, in the Abhidhamma, and all these things. Sometimes it can feel a little overwhelming, or it can feel a little almost confusing at times. Yeah, there's just so much there, and different ways do I do this or this. But I like that the Buddha, he really brings it back to that real heart of the teaching, the heart of Buddhism, the Four Noble Truths. Just looking at, suffering, that this is suffering and suffering is to be known. And then looking at the cause of suffering, and that cause of suffering is craving, the craving for sensual pleasures, the craving to be, and the craving for things to not be, for things not to be how they are, for things to be different than they are. So these three types of craving are the cause of suffering. And then he goes on, the next noble truth, the cessation of suffering. And the cessation of suffering is the giving up, the abandoning of craving. Because, a lot of times, our intuitively, we just think that, if we crave for something, the way to get rid of that suffering from craving is just to indulge in whatever we're craving. So, you're craving a nice piece of cake, and that the way to uh, get rid of that suffering is to eat the cake. But that doesn't get rid of the craving. It may temporarily, uh, alleviate it, but then it comes back. And the more, we feed craving, the greater it gets. And so, and then so it's not about feeding the craving, it's about abandoning it, getting rid of it, cutting it out from the root. And then the, the fourth noble truth, again, is the noble eightfold path. So this is this path of practice that the Buddha taught for how to remove that suffering, how to remove that craving. And he broke it down into 8 easy factors. So the factors can be, when we have something called the threefold training, we break these factors up into groups. So the first group would be sila, or our morality. So this is our actions by, our body and speech. And and so for not for, so it's right, it's broken up into right action. So this is avoiding killing, avoiding stealing, avoiding intoxicants. And, that's a base level of it, but we can always take it much higher than that, you know, avoiding harming, avoiding, hitting people, avoiding, there's all kinds of things that we can take that higher. And then there's right speech, and so this, um, in the 5 precepts, we always say about not lying, but when the Buddha said right speech, he takes it higher, not lying, avoiding frivolous speech, avoiding malicious speech, avoiding harsh speech. So, we work on developing that factor, and then right livelihood. And so, this is avoiding wrong types of livelihood. So when the Buddha talked about wrong livelihood, he broke it up into 5. It was like avoiding selling poisons, avoiding selling weapons, avoiding selling meats, avoiding selling living beings, and I can't remember the fifth one off the top of my head. I'm sorry, but we can take it, we can take it higher than that, avoiding doing livelihoods that are going to, avoiding selling intoxicants. That was the fifth one. Sorry, and avoiding these livelihoods which are going to be hurting people, are going to be harming people, bringing more greed, hatred, and delusion into the world. And so, this is the factors of sila, of our morality. And then the Buddha taught us the next one is samadhi. So developing this concentration, the meditation, really developing the mind. And this one also has three different factors to it. So the first one is right mindfulness. And again, mindfulness is this English term, and but the word the Buddha used was sati. And so this actually has two functions to it. Because it's very easy to say mindfulness, but it's like, well, what exactly does that mean? So sati has these two functions of it. One is to bring something up into the mind, like bring something up into the mind. And then the second factor of it is to be able to hold that in your mind. So um being able to bring up one of these four foundations of mindfulness. So there's the body, um, the feelings, but feelings here isn't like emotions. It's feelings as in the feelings that arise from sense contact. So touch, taste, sights, smells, sounds, thoughts. And there's three types of them. They're either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And so these, and so that's feelings. So having mindfulness of feelings. Uh, and then the third one is mindfulness of mind. And the fourth one is mindfulness of dhammas. So these are these four foundations, these four places we can use to ground our mindfulness in. And the next one the Buddha said is right effort. And so again, a lot of times effort, we think of like a physical exertion, like, putting effort into running a race or something like putting effort into studying or something like this. But when the Buddha talked about right effort, he was really talking about the mind. This is about effort in for with our mind state. So the Buddha, broke it up, right effort up into four types as well. So the first is trying to prevent unwholesome mind states from arising. So unwholesome mind states, these are anything based in like greed, hatred, delusion, and all the different like permutations and things from that. So like, jealousy, envy, bitterness, all these different types. So avoiding these kind of unwholesome mind states to arise. One way we can do that is by having a wholesome mind state in our mind. Or not doing something which is going to give rise to that. But then, inevitably what's going to happen is unwholesome mind states are going to come up. That's just, the way it is until we're enlightened that, these are just going to come up now and then. Because, even if we feel things are going well, we can't control our external environment. Everything is uncertain, everything's changing, everything is kind of uh, uncontrollable by us, so even if you're going well, someone might come up to you and like say something nasty out of nowhere, or you might come home from work and find out your house had been robbed. Anything can happen. And so these when one of so the second factor of it is if a unwholesome mind state arises, we want to get rid of that as and get rid of that, and we want to do it as quick as possible. And so it's it's one nice thing talking to people in the colder climates, because I can use this simile, is like it's like when you're driving in snow and when you first drive in snow, and you make these ruts in the snow. When the ruts are very fresh, they're not very deep. So it's usually, your car gets in the ruts and it's easy to get out. But the more you drive up and down in these ruts and more other people drive in these ruts, they get deeper and deeper and deeper. And then it's harder to get out. And it's the same when an unwholesome mind state comes up. Like say, for example, anger. Someone does something and you get angry. At first it's very minor and usually, and it's very it's much easier to get out. But you see, when you let that mind state just sit there and just fester, and your mind just spinning around thinking about that, you find, you just get angrier and angrier. You're thinking about it. Oh, I can't believe he did this. I can't believe he said that. And you're just getting more and more angry. And the more angry you get, the harder it is to get rid of that emotion, that feeling, that mind state. Feels like it's got so much power to it. But it won't be there forever. Don't worry. Remember, the Buddha said everything was impermanent, so he promised us it'll change. It's his guarantee it will change. And but and so when we do have an unwholesome mind state, we want to get rid of it. When I was a junior monk and I stayed with Lumpur Mahamon, he very senior disciple of Lumpur Cha. He only had a few, didn't speak English, only had a few little English sayings. And one of them was, let it go, get it out. And so it was about these thoughts. And the next factor of for right effort is actually trying to bring up these wholesome mind states and bringing wholesome mind states into mind. So a lot of times, we can think that with like wholesome mind states like metta, like loving kindness or compassion, or even just mindfulness itself, all these wholesome mind states, that we should either just have them, that these should be occurring naturally, or some kind of external thing should be triggering it to come up. But it's really not like that, that we have to these are skills we have to develop, and we have to learn how to intentionally bring these up into the mind. It's a story I really like to tell because it was so impactful for me. Was when I was a novice, right at the end of my first rains retreat as a novice. I was having a tough time. The monastery was going through a change of abbots at the time, and we weren't sure who was going to be the new abbot, and everything was quite chaotic. And then Lumpur Pasno came to visit, and he's one of the most senior and most respected of the Western Ajahns. He's really, really just, everyone describes him as he's solid. He's just solid. And he's this just great monk. And I went to go see him at his kuti. So I go over there and I start chatting with him, and I'm telling him my problems. And, and I was saying, I'm finding it really difficult to be inspired right now. Like I don't feel very inspired. And he said to me, inspiration is a skill. And I tell this story often because, again, it was so impactful. I just never thought of it in that way. I thought I just should be inspired. I'm living in a monastery in the forest in Thailand. I'm practicing. All these monks around me are practicing. I should just be inspired. But it just, it's not just something which should always be there. You have to learn how to bring up these feelings. So it's the same with this. You have to learn how to bring up these wholesome mind states. And then the third factor is uh, in the samadhi section is right samadhi. So this is our concentration. This is really from the meditation, developing these deeper states of concentration. And then the last parts of the Noble Eightfold Path is just the developing of wisdom. So developing right view and right intention. Right view is, seeing things in terms of the Four Noble Truths, and really deeply, deep down from our practice, from our meditation, having that deep penetrating wisdom. And then right intention. So the intention to non-cruelty, to non-ill will, to renunciation, really when we do stuff, having that right intention to doing that. And so this is, the Buddha always kept bringing it back to these Four Noble Truths. So sometimes when you're practicing and or learning about Dhamma and you feel kind of overwhelmed or confused or everything, or yeah, what should I be doing? What shouldn't I be doing? One thing you can just always just bring it back to the Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path. The Buddha always did, and these are really the heart of Buddhist practice, and this is the Buddha's path to for us to alleviate all that suffering in our lives and to really eventually uproot it and permanently remove it. So I'd like to offer this as a bit of a reflection for everyone this evening.